Welcome to Leaders in the Making podcast. We are so excited to be diving into some different topics on leadership qualities and introduce some of my good friends to you guys so that you get to hear from them. And just like get ready for the summer or for whatever opportunities are out there for you to step into leadership roles. So today we are going to be talking about relational health. I'm really excited for this topic. We're going to get to hear about the difficulties of creating and maintaining a healthy relationship. We're going to get to kind of dive into what it means to humble ourselves for the sake of a relationship. And we're going to learn how this all ties into the ways that we are called to be disciple makers. So I'm really excited. Like I said, I've got a couple of my good friends here with me. We have Gwen Numbers and Alex Sneath. So thank you all both so much for being here on the podcast with us. How about you tell us a little bit about yourself, your history with WinShape, all those kind of things.
Yeah, so excited to be here. My name is Gwen Numbers, and my history with WinShape starts a long time ago, about 15 years ago. I worked a summer for girls' camp at Mount Berry, and then took a couple years off and came back as the worship speaker for 2 summers. And I now work for WinShape Marriage, where I help couples who are looking to come to a marriage retreat or who are looking for some guidance and help in their marriage.
Wow, that's awesome. So you got to did you start as like a counselor and then come into
the
speaker
I was
role?
Actually a bonus counselor for half a summer and then a counselor for half a summer.
Nice.
For that first summer. And then the Lord took me overseas for a couple summers, so I couldn't serve at WinShape. And actually right after I graduated college, the Lord put WinShape so heavy on my heart. It's like, people don't work camp after college, but I was working for a student ministry, so I had the summers off and reached out and ended up being able to come back for the worship speaker role for 2 summers. Cool. And it was amazing. Yeah. Some of my favorite summers of my life.
And now working in marriage.
And now back with WinShape.
You are basically a professional when it comes to relational.
Yes, I wouldn't quite go that far. I still consider myself a newlywed, just married about 2 years, but it's such a great team, and I love being a part of WinShape still.
That's awesome. Yeah. And speaking of student ministry, Alex, welcome.
Yeah, so my name is Alex, and I'm a student minister currently at Crosspoint City Church up in Adairsville. So if there's any listeners from Crosspoint City, shout out to you guys.
Shout out.
But as far as my history with WinShape, I started out as a counselor 3 years ago at Boys Camp in Cleveland. So again, shout out Boys Camp. I love those guys. So I started out as a counselor, moved into a leadership position the next summer as the Blaze Squad leader. And then this past summer, I got to serve as the legacy leader, their new high school program, which was just phenomenal. And so it's been really, really awesome getting to be a part of this journey.
Yeah, and you got to help start off the legacy program, right? Like that was the first year we did it this past year?
Yeah, it was first year. I mean, man, the guys are great. I mean, just trying to kickstart things can be tough at times, but it was phenomenal. I mean, making the chant was really awesome. So there's a lot of cool integral parts, just like being that first like inaugural year of legacy. So.
Yeah, and I think this is a little side note, but I feel like that age, like those high schools, that is like great core age for this topic specifically on like relational health and like building strong relationships there. So that's really cool. Well, we're really excited to have both of y'all here. Excited to jump into this topic. So let's go ahead and start by. Let's define it. What exactly is relational health, or how would you define a healthy relationship?
I think one thing I'll note now is I know we are talking about relationships beyond just a romantic relationship. So I think it definitely encompasses romantic relationships. But if you start out thinking, oh, that doesn't apply to me, I'm single right now, it really does, because our relationships encompass so much more than just romantic relationships. So I think in all of our friendships and our leadership and our colleagues and your classmates, wherever you find yourself, you have relationships.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. And I know for me personally, when I think of relationships, I mean, I think back to football days, and I know I've said this before, but I think Nick Saban has a great quote about it, but he talks about how relationships should be transformational, not transactional. And I think that's like huge just to know, because it just adds so much more care and love to a relationship, rather than, oh, well, I do this for you and you do this for me, and okay, that's just kind of the end of our exchange. But it's like, okay, no, like, I want to actually help better you and vice versa, and I want to look out for you. And so I think that's very important. That's something that I know I've experienced in my own life as well.
Yeah.
I think that's a great start to the healthy relationships too, of if you're looking to kind of determine, is this a healthy relationship? If it's more transformational than transactional, I think you're off to a good start.
Yeah. It's a great tagline in there too, like transformational and not transactional. Love that. Why would you think that it might be hard to maintain those like kind of healthy relationships as we grow older, as we kind of like are experiencing changes in our relational bonds with people? Like what are some of the difficulties that arise to keep those relationships healthy?
Yeah, I think it's just, it takes effort, right? If you want to really build healthy relationships, it takes effort. It takes some sacrifice. Especially when things aren't going, your way, or maybe, you have to show up for a friend and they're facing something difficult. Nobody necessarily wants to deal with those things or have to help carry some of those burdens at times. But again, it's so important that we do. Again, we want to, model after Jesus, and love people well, and so.
Sacrifice was the word that came to my mind too. I think it sucks that it's true, but we're selfish people. Like, I want what's best for me. I want to do the easy thing. I want to follow, when I'm not walking in the Spirit. And so, like you said, relationships take work. And so it's hard to be able to default to lay ourselves down or to default to give the other person the way or to walk through hard situations when we might not feel like we have the capacity. And so I think it's hard to maintain healthy relationships because it takes work. It doesn't happen naturally, whether it's a friendship or a relationship or even an acquaintance. It's so much harder than it seems.
Yeah. That reminds me and my wife were just recently talking about this, of like the nature of sin and how it at the heart of it is selfishness in general.
Yeah.
It is selfishness is what causes us to sin or like leads us into sin. And so just you mentioning that brought that back to my mind of, it's like selfish ambitions are what can cause hindrances to any of those relationships.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll just add, like, even when I think back in my own life, like the times when people showed up during those hard times, when it was an inconvenience to them. You guys probably have those same people in your lives, those friends that you can think of just on instant. And it's just, wow, like these are people that care for me. And it's because, they put in the effort. And it didn't matter that it was an inconvenience at that time or that was hard, but they showed up. Yeah,
showing up when it's hard. Not when it's easy, but when it's hard. Yeah.
Yeah. It reminds me of a Thomas Merton quote. I'm going to pull it up.
Yeah.
Let me see. I highlighted it here, but this stands out to me so much from the perspective of laying ourselves down and not always thinking of what we want most, but really what the other person needs, and in a mutual edification to see that. But Thomas Merton says, "The beginning of love is to let those we love be perfectly themselves, not to twist them to fit our own image. If in loving them we do not love what they are, but only their potential likeness to ourselves, then we do not love them. We only love the reflection of ourselves that we find in them." And I remember that wrecking me as a college student years ago, where I realized, like, wow, how much am I putting pressure on this friend to be what I want them to be or what I think I need them to be, when really I'm just, what I love in them is what I see of myself in them, and not seeing who God has made them to be, and in dialoguing and connecting and growing with them in that. And that has stood out to me for years.
Yeah, that's so humbling right there.
Yeah. I think of Acts, like the book of Acts. When the early church started, and there's so many different people, again, Gentiles, Jews coming together, and you just think, man, how do they care for one another? Like, how do they, again, you talk about like projecting ourselves on people, or, just wanting to see this certain potential in them, but how do they do that? And yet we see them, again, sacrifice for one another, provide for one another, care for one another. And it's just so cool to see, hey, it doesn't matter, how different a person may be, like you can still have that healthy relationship with them. You can still care for them well.
Yeah. And that's exactly what Jesus did for us. Like, he laid his life down for us.
Yeah. And ultimately, when we are, as believers, as Christians, and as leaders, we are striving to be more like Christ. And so if we are looking at him to make ourselves more like him, to be the best versions of ourselves we can, it should lead us, like you're saying, like to be more like him as far as relationships go, and the way that we interact with one another. So how does that play out in like a camp setting? So when you take yourself back to camp and being there, how do you see like this community, this like biblical community kind of building at camp?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and touch on that. I know for myself, I think back to my first summer, and I think to my squad leader, Pop Rocks, or Brandon Alvarez is his real name. But he was a great leader, and he always would check in on me. Again, being a new staffer, and again, he was supposed to be the leader of our team, of our squad, and he'd always check in on me. He'd always give me feedback, whether it be positive or negative, just, hey, man, you're doing really great in this. Like, this is what I love seeing from you. Hey, like, I really need you to work on this. And so it was just very honest and open feedback. And I think that really helped me as well. I mean, as I kind of moved into leadership roles and positions, and, man, how I try to care for my teams and try to be for them. And I remember one of my fondest memories is just hanging out on the weekends. I mean, again, it's awesome to have people in your life that don't feel like they have to be around you, but that they want to be around you. And so, man, a lot of fun memories on weekends, just going out to restaurants, just hanging out, watching movies, whatever it is. And it's phenomenal. Yeah. It's just awesome.
Yeah, camp is such a special place because it's very unusual for you to be in a place where you are with people 24/7, except maybe the occasional off day or off weekend. But you all hang out together anyways, because what are you going to do in a small town Georgia or so I think there's such an opportunity, especially for those of you who are leading, to cultivate those relationships, like Alex said, to be the one when you have an off day to take the time you need for your own refreshment, but also to invite a newer staff to say, hey, I'm going to go grab coffee, or I'm going to run to Walmart. Do you need anything? Do you need a ride? And take that opportunity to cultivate those relationships, because as a new staff, it means the world. And having the leadership in wherever space you are, whether it's camp or another sphere, you have the opportunity to initiate those relationships that go so far for the ones being led. And I think it gives you clout as a leader too, because it lets people know you care more about who they are than about the position that they're filling on your team.
Yeah. Man, that's so good. Oh gosh. I just had a thought and it escaped me. It'll come back to me in a little bit. I'll come back to it.
I was just going to extend the question to you guys. Like, have you guys, can you think back to a specific person that has like helped you or really kind of modeled this well? Again, I kind of talked about Pop Rocks, my squad leader. Again, just phenomenal dude and a dude that cared for me well. But as you guys, I mean, even in your current positions, like anybody who's helped you or like, man, they really shepherd you well. Yeah,
I can think back to when I was a summer staffer. One of my closest friends now was one of my supervisors back when I was summer staffer, Colby Watt. And Colby did a phenomenal job of that, of reaching out and giving me like opening opportunities for me to interact with him kind of outside of just the work like space, and saying like, hey, we're going to come do this, come hang out. Well, let's like get to know one another away from just the camp setting and the work setting here. But then also encourage that as we were in camp too. So he recognized some like qualities in me and like called that out while we were working. And like, Titus, you were really good at this, and I know that because I know you, not because I'm just like making an assumption or I know you as a name, but like because I've gotten the chance to know you, I know that I can entrust you with this because I truly know you. And I just remember that making such a big impact in my head, like my first or second summer, and that just really changed the trajectory of my like leadership growth and my development. So
yeah, for me, I think it was more peer and like acquaintance friendships at camp when I came back after the little hiatus from being a summer staffer when I was only 18 to coming back right post college, where life is just a little bit different. And the peers and so it was the Jumpstart team, which at girls camp at Mount Berry, that's kind of your morning worship. And so we had a very tight-knit group because we had to be up before breakfast. We were eating hours before the girls were awake for sound check and all of that. And the girls there and some of the other girls on staff that summer have to this day been some of my closest friends, where we've been in each other's weddings. And I think that's a great thought too for those who aren't always in leadership positions, that you can still have influence and make a huge difference. I was nervous going back to camp. I'm like, I haven't been here in years. It's a whole new generation of staff. And I kind of felt like I was pulled right into the fold because people had the mindset of not just their comfort of the friends they had last summer, but welcoming me in as what felt like a new staff, even though I had been there years before.
Yeah. I oftentimes feel like we step into camp with the mindset of I'm coming in and I'm going to make an impact on the life of a camper, and that's kind of it. We stop it there, which is that is a huge purpose of camp. But I think we kind of sell ourselves, but even camp short when we do that, because we don't think about the impact that that the Lord's going to make on us, or the campers could have on us, but also the impact that we can have on others, as we have an opportunity as a leader, whether that's in a leadership role or just a leader because of being a Christ follower. The impact that we can have on the community around us and the people around us is huge. And I just oftentimes encouraging our staff, like, hey, don't sell yourself short of the impact that can be had all around you, not just on the life of campers.
That's a great thought. So I think you're right. We default to thinking how we'll impact the campers. But I think if you were to ask any staff, or even those of you listening, like, probably your most significant relationships that you've taken away from camp have been your peers and your friends and your leaders. It's funny too at camp, because your leader is probably like your age, or maybe a year or two. So it really, it kind of flows together so closely.
Yeah, very much his idea. I think you mentioned earlier, like the peer-to-peer relationship and like leadership. How, in y'all's experience, how has it been like maintaining these relationships? I know you just talked about being in weddings and stuff, but relationships aren't always easy. You know, it's not always just like the easiness in it. What has kind of been the process of like keeping some of those relationships, whether it's in the summer and keeping everyone intact and working together, or outside of the summer as you're like kind of expanding your relational rapport with people?
Yeah, I'd say, I mean, inside the summer, it's definitely easier. Again, you're in close proximity and you're constantly with each other. And so it's a lot easier to reach out to somebody to find out how they're doing. Definitely outside of summer, it's more difficult, especially as life gets busy. And man, I've been able to have just a few hangouts with some of my former Blaze Squad members. And so it's been really cool just to reconnect with them and hang out. But again, it just goes back, you got to be intentional and just, I mean, thinking about them, praying about them. But you know, I know it's hard because you want to be present where you're at. And so you have to maintain the relationships that are currently around you. But then, I mean, you know, when you have that thought, man, I wonder what this person's doing, man, go check on them. See if they want to hang out there, if they're in town or whatever. And so I think that's what I would say, is that it's definitely a lot easier in close proximity, but it takes more effort, more intention, you know, outside of the summer.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think, again, summer is just kind of a black hole of time and space. Like nothing really makes sense. And so you have such an opportunity to maximize those relationships. And then, like Alex said, just being intentional, whether, I mean, we live in the most connected time in history. And so scheduling that FaceTime date, or meeting up in a city over a long weekend, or trading weekends, visiting the other at their school, whatever that looks like, just to, like Alex said, make that intentional and reach out even when it seems like there are other things you could be doing. It's so worth it in the long run to have friends from camp from 10, 15 years that go by, and they have seen such a special experience. Like, camp is so special, and to share that is really, really neat.
I oftentimes have to remind myself, not because it's hard, but just in general, just to remind myself of like, hey, the Lord made us for community. Truly, we were made to live in community with Him and with others. And I have to tell myself that at times of like, hey, I have a responsibility in that to uphold these relationships and uphold the community. It's not all on this person over here to reach out to me and see how I'm doing, but I need to reach out to them, see how they're doing, and do my part in holding this community together. Which kind of leads into my next question of, how does this tie into our role as disciple makers, or as we are like looking at discipleship, as we're all called to make disciples. And sometimes we can just put so much pressure on that word or that title of like, I've got to lead a group of people that might be 10 years younger than me and teach them how to follow the word. But let's kind of break that down, and like, what is our role within relational or healthy relationships and disciple makers? How do those meet in the middle?
Yeah. I mean, I think you said it pretty well, how we have to be first. I mean, I think about Jesus again. He literally came for us. I mean, He made the first move. I mean, it wasn't us making a move towards Him. And so, again, it does go back towards intention, but also knowing, like, at the end of the day, things are in the Lord's hands. Obviously, like, you can try and disciple somebody as well as you can, but it's up to the Lord to do the full transformation. And so our job is to still care, to still love, to still try and develop these relationships and, man, pour into these people, whether it's, you know, work related, you know, we talked about summer, whatever it is, whether it's their faith, you know, hey, how can I encourage this person or help build them up? Whatever that is, our job is to try and pour into them. But again, just relying on the Lord, knowing that transformation comes from Him. I think that's huge, and that's definitely helped me and even wear the role that I'm in today. So,
Yeah.
Yeah, I think too, releasing some of the pressure of, I think discipleship can feel like such a heavy word and can make people feel like, oh, I'm not far enough along in my walk, or if people knew how I struggled, or so many thoughts that kind of cause us to question if we are good enough or godly enough or mature enough, whatever that looks like, to lead a discipleship relationship. But I think to release that pressure, any friendship or relationship among Christians should have an element of discipleship, because like you mentioned earlier, Titus, like we are seeking to follow Christ and seeking to invite others to follow him with us. And it makes me think of, I think it's 1 Corinthians 11, where Paul says, follow me as I follow Christ. And I think that's a great thought for those of you who are leading and those of you who aren't, to have that mindset of, like, the first step in like deep discipleship is for you to set your heart to follow the Lord, knowing you're going to make mistakes. You're not going to get it right. You're going to hurt people. You're going to sin. And none of that disqualifies us from having a discipleship relationship, because if sin disqualified us, we're all doomed.
Yeah.
And that's the grace of Christ. And so I think adding that element of not just cultivating friendships with people where you talk about sports or family or common interests, but adding in that element of, what is God teaching you this summer, and how can I pray for you, and what's been hard, and just pulling in the spiritual aspect that kind of undergirds our whole lives. I think that alone makes it a discipleship relationship. It doesn't have to have this lofty pressure of I don't know, so many other things. And it can be more, but it doesn't have to be.
I mean, I think you're spot on. I think that I find myself feeling victim of that. I think anytime that I'm like thinking of these topics, I have to put myself in that situation. And I find myself so often like, hey, I've got to have it right. I've got to not be perfect, but be close to it. I put that expectation on myself. But I think we're right on something here of the best discipleship opportunities we have are in the mess. It's not necessarily when everything is perfect and going well, but it's, hey, like, I've messed up and I want to share that with you and open up with you so that you can see and grow with me, but also so you can also grow in the opportunity that you could prevent from yourself or whatever it may be.
Yeah. And I think there's so much power in saying, not even just confessing. It might be a confession, and maybe the Lord leads you to like a true confession to a brother or sister in Christ. But I think just acknowledging like, hey, I struggle with this. For you who are leading, that means wonders to the people who are serving under you, because it humanizes you and it makes them see like, I can struggle too. If Alex is willing to share that he snapped on a camper, or hopefully not a camper, maybe another staffer or something, but it allows us to be real, and we have to be, because we are broken. And so I think, like you said, it's humbling and it's scary and it's vulnerable, but ultimately that's where we find the most growth, is being able to grow together and say, hey, I need accountability in this just as much as you might as a new staffer.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have one friend in particular that I'm thinking of right now as you're speaking, and man, he's so humble, because every time, whether it's a shortcoming or a failure, he comes to me just, man, like this happened, and I just
owns it.
Yeah, he just owns it. And I'm like, how do you do that? Like, he thinks he's bad, for like, stumbling into this sin, or maybe he made this failure, and yet I'm like, man, like, how do you just share that so willingly, so freely? And so it definitely builds that trust, and it just, again, like you said, it makes it human. Because, again, there's so much pressure at times that we put on ourselves, or sometimes we allow others put on us to be, oh, man, well, I have to be perfect. I have to look the part. I have to play the part in order, for things to go well, or, for people not to just kind of outcast me.
Yeah. I think I felt that especially as a young leader, when in early leadership opportunities where I felt like, if I mess this up, then I'm not going to be asked to lead again. Or if they knew how I sinned or how I struggled or XYZ, I would feel like I would disqualify myself. And I think especially early on, it's really easy to feel like I can't mess this up by letting people know, especially in Christian leadership. I don't know if that applies elsewhere, because there's such a unique guilt and shame that I think we often put on ourselves that I don't think the Lord intends us to feel. I think there's such freedom in the gospel that to be able to admit, like your friend says, of like, yeah, I struggled, I messed up with this, and then move on. Like the scripture says, like if we confess our sins, he's faithful and just to forgive us our sins and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. And of course, there are probably special circumstances where you shouldn't be leading, but I don't think that's the blanket cover. And so those of you stepping into leadership for the first time, it's okay to struggle and to need help and to admit that you don't get it right all the time.
Yeah. The ripple effect is crazy too. I think of, and there's twofold in this, but one of, I think of the people that impacted me, that opened up to me and invited me in, that then allowed me to do the same with someone else. And now I've been able to see the follow up in their life and like how now they've got cool. people coming under them. Yeah. It's really cool. It's discipleship built out, like played out in reality,
totally,
which is crazy. But I also, as I was saying that, I also was thinking of how much easier it was for me as a counselor to do that with a kid. Like I remember having a camper come to me and walking through some really hard things in his life and me opening up and being like, hey, man, I dealt with some of the same stuff, and watching the transformation happen there. It was so much easier in that relationship than it is with this, like someone who's like my age or like a friend. Why do y'all think that's the case?
I was just about to ask you that. Like, why do we feel that way?
I would say, at least for myself, is oftentimes when it's a peer-to-peer relationship, you want to compare. You never want to be doing worse than somebody. But when you're doing better, of course, you feel pretty good about yourself. Or if you're doing as well, you're okay, like I feel okay. But when it's peer-to-peer, it's like this subconscious like comparison of just, oh, well, man, they're doing better and they have all the answers, but I don't. And they're the same age or they're in the same position as I am. What am I doing wrong? That's the question that I know, like, I'll ask myself, it's like, man, what am I doing wrong? I'm naturally like a perfectionist, which sucks at times. And so, that's a question that pops into my head is, okay, well, they have this, or maybe they did this. Well, what am I doing wrong? And sometimes you'll get a clear answers, but sometimes just patience. Like you're just patience.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's got to be comparison. Like when you're talking with a camper or someone significantly younger, it almost feels like, because you're sharing, you're still helping them because you're so much further along. But like Alex said, when it's a peer, it's like, I don't want you to think I struggle with this, or I don't want you to think this is hard. I'll sit with you in the hard, but I don't want you to know that it also is for me, which is so broken. Like that's such a waste of an opportunity to really connect with someone and really grow, because the likelihood is that that person also is struggling in similar ways, and they also aren't wanting to say it because they don't want you to compare, it's just this cycle of, if we all just admit our brokenness, we'll be like, okay, wait, so we actually are all on the same level. It's just a different level than we're pretending it to be.
And that's what I love. Like I've led small groups before in the past. And of course, when I first led a small group, again, I had that impression of, okay, I have to look the part and be the part and all that. And then, once we all start sharing, we're all like, yeah, we all struggle with this. Or, oh yeah, actually I've done that too. And you're like, oh, like this person's not perfect. Like they're exactly where I am,
and that's so freeing. It's such a relief to know you're not the only one. And I think that's where the enemy just seeks to trap us so much, is by keeping us silent and making us like to isolate us, to make us feel like no one else understands or no one is as bad as us. And all it takes is the openness to say me too. And that just opens up such a deeper community and friendship.
Yeah. I think you hit on a point that's very important there too, is like thinking the enemy's role in this. I was just thinking of how, like, sometimes it's with the pressure of a leader title, or even like seeing someone else with a leader title, we in our society kind of assume leadership to be someone who's greater or better or should be better, and I think that's like, leaders are important, and having good, healthy leaders is very important. That's why we're doing this podcast, is to encourage that. Right. But I don't think we should ignore what the power of the enemy is, and like what the enemy can do through some of those things in our life. So this title of leader can sometimes help put us on a pedestal, or put someone on a pedestal that they don't belong. And that kind of takes us back to the beginning when we were talking about community and how it's like everyone in this together and doing this together.
Yeah.
Which is really hard. Like, I think just to put it blankly, it's tough. It's hard to navigate and figure that out. But I think recognizing it and calling it out goes a long way with those around you. Of like, hey, I might be your leader this summer, but I am like, we're here in this with you.
Yeah.
I'm not in this position of, where I have this perfect standard or anything like that. Right. So
yeah, it's humility. I mean, obviously that's what Jesus modeled for us. I mean, it's just laying it down, just being humble, being a servant. And so I think, what you were talking about is, right on the money.
Yeah. Yeah. Like comes again, full circle back to like, if we're trying to be more like Christ, if we want to be more like him, it is being humble and like humbling ourselves to the position. So, okay. So we've talked a lot around this idea, and this has been great. As we think about our summer staff that are getting ready, whether they're stepping into a leadership role for the first time or they've, are coming back as a leader or something like that, how would you help them like connect some of this stuff with their responsibility, but also the role that they're going to have, or maybe in the pressure that they have coming into it? What would you say to those staff?
Yeah, I would definitely say find somebody, if you know somebody who's previously been in the role that you're stepping into, and ask them how things went, ask them maybe how to navigate certain things. Also look to your leadership as well. I mean, whether it's a coordinator or whoever that is, look to them and, hey, I feel nervous about this. Hey, can you tell me, maybe explain or walk me through a little bit more of this? I think just asking those questions and being humble enough to say, hey, I don't know all of this, and I'm kind of scared or anxious about this, and I need help.
Yeah, I think too, asking yourself right now and asking yourself at the start of the summer and maybe even throughout, like, where am I feeling insecure or uncertain? And just naming those feelings and allowing yourself to acknowledge that it might not be easy, and it is hard, and it can be scary, but to not go in, I think it's easy to just kind of flip that on its head and go in with an arrogance or a confidence of, they did make a good choice. I am a great leader, and you probably are, but like we've talked about, there's so much opportunity to learn and grow. And so I think start by being honest with whatever those feelings are, whether it's inferiority or superiority, and starting to work through those before the summer starts so that you can be what your team needs. And ultimately, it's the Lord who's called you to this role, and it's WinShape is his, and these campers are his, and we just get to play a role in what God's doing. But let yourself think through some of those thoughts and some of those struggles or weaknesses, and ask the Lord to help you as you struggle through them this summer. Yeah,
a lot of self-awareness, whether it's like seeking others out, or digging deeper within yourself, or even going to prayer and speaking with the Lord. I think you're spot on. There's a lot of self-awareness that we need to take that responsibility of and do for ourselves as we get ready for stepping in.
Yeah, I think similar to what Alex said too, is looking for someone off-site, someone who isn't working camp, maybe even someone who has never worked camp, but a leader that you trust and respect, and maybe ask them, hey, can I call you on every off day or every off weekend, or can we touch base once a week, so that you have kind of an outside source that I think when you are leading, it can be hard to feel like you can talk through the frustrations or the struggles with those who are also experiencing it. And so look for a mentor or someone who you trust as a leader that you can reach out to throughout the summer and get their advice and their wisdom as you lead at camp.
Yeah. I think perspective is huge. And I think even any way we can expand our perspective and see other views is awesome. This has been an incredible conversation. Thank you both so much. As we wrap up, I wanted to ask, do y'all have any final thoughts or anything you want to say to our listeners, whether they be summer staff or college students out there, anyone who is just looking to grow in leadership qualities? Anything that you would want to end on?
I would just say be constant in prayer. I mean, continue to pray through a lot of things. I mean, pray with your teams. If you are in a position of leadership, that's one thing that I really love doing as when I was in leadership, is at the end of the night trying to pray with our teams, figure out what we could be praying over. And so I'd say just be constant in prayer. If you're nervous, if you're excited, whatever you're feeling, be constant in prayer.
Yeah, I would say, being constant in prayer has got to be, and in the Word, of course, that if we aren't, as Christian leaders, if we aren't grounded in Scripture and prayer, then we're missing it. And I think it can be really easy to miss it. I think I'm in my life right now missing it a little bit. I get caught up in the work and forget what the foundation is. But I think being humble enough to acknowledge that God has put you in this position, you haven't gotten yourself there, and knowing without him, it is kind of futile. Like if we are leading people because we think we're really good leaders, then we're sort of seeking to make people more like us and not more like Christ. And ultimately, we hope that your heart is to become ever more like Christ so that others become more like him too.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, guys, thank y'all again so much. This is a great conversation. I love this topic. I'm a little bit more extroverted in general, and so I tend to lean more on the relational side, but I think it's so important and for our leaders to really sit in and evaluate for themselves as they step in. So Alex, Gwen, thank y'all so much for joining the podcast today. And thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Leaders in the Making. I do have a challenge for you all. We are still looking for some top-notch summer staff, just like yourself or anyone else out there, to come have the summer of a lifetime with us. So here's the challenge. I want you to think about those friends you have, the siblings, those classmates of yours, or even yourself. If you were just a college student who happened upon this podcast, I want to encourage you to think about this as well. But send them a link to work@winshape.org and encourage them to apply today. We are really trying to make this summer unforgettable for you, for your friends, and for campers out there. Again, like we mentioned earlier, not just the impact that we have on campers, but the impact that we have on our friends and what impact the Lord and others are going to have on us as well. So we want to encourage you to get your friends to apply at work@winshape.org. Thanks for being a part of the WinShape mission. Until next time, I'm your host, Titus Arnold. Thanks for listening.